introduce Dr. Margarethe Kusenbach, assistant professor at the USF Department of Sociology. She received a PhD in sociology from UCLA in 2003 and began teaching at University of South Florida the same year. Her current research focuses on issues of community and on social aspects of hurricanes. In 2007, she received an USF grant to conduct an interdisciplinary study of community resources and disaster resilience in Florida mobile home parks. Dr. Kusenbach's other areas of interest include urban neighborhoods and culture, emotions, and qualitative research methods. She has published papers in the journals City and Community, Symbolic Interaction, Qualitative Sociology, Foreign Qualitative Sociology Research, Ethnography, and Studies in Symbolic Interaction, as well as several research. She's currently also working on 2 co-authored books. Please welcome Margarethe.
Can you hear me? Is it working? No? How about now? Right here? Okay, mic closer. Okay. All right. Okay, thanks. Thank you, Isabel and Margaret, for inviting me. It's an honor to be here. I've been interested in art and community and public art for a long time, but I rarely get the chance to connect this kind of closeted passion with my work and my research in sociology. So Rick told us about his work in neighborhoods and communities as an artist, and obviously this is not art in a traditional way, but he's using his talents and sensibilities as an artist to facilitate social processes that go far beyond the world of art. My own current research and work is also about communities and neighborhoods. As Isabel said, I'm currently studying the politically correct term is manufactured housing communities, but many people just call them trailer parks. Here in Florida, or mobile home parks, and there's many of them, as you know. And in the past, I've also looked at urban neighborhoods in Hollywood, Los Angeles. And my primary understanding of neighborhoods and communities is grounded in ethnographic fieldwork and in a simple desire to find out how these places work and what it means to live there. But also, like Rick, I hope to take my work beyond the world of academia and ultimately inspire positive social change. So that's a parallel. And Rick has shown us that it's very obvious what art can offer to social change. This is not typical art. It's very collaborative. It's not a single person effort. It's more process-oriented than outcome-oriented. And it deals with people. It doesn't have focus on objects. It can't be sold in galleries, and you can't hang it over your living room couch. So, but it's also typical art in the way that it takes a very creative mind to overcome the many obstacles along the way, and it takes a very clear vision to even begin the process, and it takes a strong sense of openness and curiosity to redefine what's going on, and to ultimately let go, to curb one's desire to control and micromanage every step of the process all the time. And those are talents that are not always found among the people who desire social change. At least academics are a lot more timid, But I still think that academia has some offerings for social change and can offer some resources towards this goal. And I'd just very briefly like to discuss 3 and then have a more dialogic conversation. So on one level, academic researchers, they can provide concepts and frames of understandings of what's going on. So Rick's work is something that many of my colleagues have lately called social preservation. And it involves renovating old houses, but the focus is not on the objects, but on the people and the community. So it's very different from historic preservation, which is more focused on the objects. Social preservation is kind of a new movement in many places, but it's not always easy to develop an agreement of who are the people that need to be preserved and who are the people that do not need to be preserved. who's authentic, who can lay a claim to the area, and whose claim is less legitimate. So there are issues of authenticity at stake. You know, where does preservation end? Where does gentrification begin? For instance, are past injustices, like forced segregation of people with color, are these things that are deserving to be preserved? So those are some difficult questions that social preservationists have to address in their work. Another concept that comes to my mind when I heard about Rick's work is community assets, and he just used the term when he talked about these guys in the community. And so this is also something that has been gone in academia. The community developers specifically have shifted from asking what's wrong with the community, you know, what resources does it need, to asking what are the strengths and the asset of this community. How can we utilize the existing resources, the social connections, the social capital to improve what's already there? And you can see how the shift in perception informs a shift in strategy. It's not about bringing stuff in from the outside, but it's working with the resources that are already there. It's not about fixing a community, but about growing a community. And lastly, in my own work, I've also developed some concepts that might be helpful to this process. And I've been working on the types of interactions you find in communities. You know, what is the nitty-gritty work of neighboring? And how do people interact in neighborhoods as opposed to more public spaces? So I wrote something on, I developed some concepts that describe the issue of the practice of neighboring. And I've also developed some concepts to describe the nested sense of community many of us have. You know, community isn't just one thing. I mean, there's many communities we are part of. And often our communities are overlapping, and they're spatially in different areas, in different spatial contexts. And so, and I'd be happy to say more about that later on if you're curious. And so the first point I want to make is academics can provide certain concepts and frames that allow us to compare what's going on at one place to what goes on at another places. So they help us identify the larger patterns and processes that transcend the specifics. They provide abstractions that let us see the forest and not just the trees. So the second contribution I see that academics can bring to the table of social change, in their work they can correct distorted views and stereotypes and provide more complex images that easily defied like drive-by impressions. Academic research can give you in-depth information about people and places that have long been misunderstood in public media and in the mainstream culture. For instance, much work in sociology has been done in the past to show that ghettos or inner cities or whatever you might call these places are not places where disorder and crime and dysfunction is rampant, but these are very organized social worlds that largely operate on the same values and by the same principles that other types of neighborhood and communities operate. So this isn't any news to the people that live in these communities, but it might be news to others. And so that is very important that you emphasize the complexity and the similarities of neighborhoods of those neighborhoods to others if you want to facilitate your social change, because it means they're not different, they're not others, but they're just like us, and then we can see similarities and start from there. So academics can debunk certain stereotypes that exist and fill in voids of knowledge for public discourse. And then lastly, academics can also provide another contribution. They can offer some tools and methods that are needed to collect this in-depth information and to achieve this level of understanding. You know, we need to live in these communities. We need to talk to people on a repeated basis. We need to develop rapport, gain first-hand understanding, and almost literally walk in people's shoes to really know what their lives are about. A few years ago, I wrote a paper on a method that I developed when I studied neighborhoods in Los Angeles that I called a go-along. And this is something I developed because I was frustrated with just doing interviews with people. across a table. And also by living there, I didn't quite understand how people see this neighborhood. So I asked people to take me on a tour of the neighborhood and point out everything that they see and what things mean to them. And I found out, even though I lived in this neighborhood, I had no clue how other people see this area. And I'm sure you heard about this, the elephant in the dark metaphor. You know, there's a person feeling the trunk, a person feeling the tail, and a person feeling the legs, and they all think it's a different animal. But this was even like in bright daylight, there were different animals out there, and I couldn't even put my perception together with the other people. Then I also experimented with a mapping interview where I had people draw maps or use a map that I gave them to show me where the everyday life takes place. So just in order to get a deeper understanding of the everyday life as a practice, not just as an abstraction. So some of the work that academics do, or some like the field research type work that I do, I think can help narrow these misunderstandings. But it goes beyond what regular people do, the regular conversations people have, because you stop being a member. I mean, you step out of your own practical life and try to really understand others, and you do it in a systematic fashion. You do it with a diversity of people, and you do it many times over and systematically, and so it gives you a more in-depth view at what people are like that live in the community than you would get if you just followed your own practical life. And so that's also a prerequisite for successful social change, that you really know the people that you're dealing with in the communities. And so overall, as I said, academics tend to be a lot more timid and pessimistic, and it takes the lionhearts of artists and political activists to begin the daunting work of social change, but we can bring little offerings to the table. So to get the discussion, to make it a bit more dialogue, more of a dialogue, I'd like to just, I have about 3 questions that I hadn't had a chance to ask you yet. And the first one you already answered, and that was the issue of how you handle kind of unintended consequences of your project. Project Row Houses draws attention to this neighborhood and speeds up the development and brings in gentrification. And how do you handle these negative aspects? I mean, negative in terms of maybe weakening the preservation efforts, the social preservation efforts that you've been trying to do. And you told us that there's the strategy of buying houses, right? But I wonder if there's any other kind of coping mechanisms you have to fight off unwanted effects.
No.
No?
No, I mean, it's not a, I mean, I don't know, every day we try to do something to promote the community that we would like to see exist, while, there are other people doing what they want to do. So one of the things that I have a little bit of insight into, and I'm really trying to figure this out as I go along, but I know that ultimately gentrification is really about somebody making money. I mean, it's an economic thing that somebody's making money, and I mean, there's a whole sociological aspect in terms of why people who move into neighborhoods want to bring other people like themselves and not communicate with the existing people. That's a sociological conversation, but the beginning of it is just an economic conversation about real estate and who can make money and so on and so forth. And the thing that I'm kind of playing around with now, and I have a little bit of a glimpse into, and I'm trying to work this out, is that I mean, there is an economic thing to generating housing for low-income populations as well. I mean, just as there is for doing upscale. Now the amount of money set to be made is much greater if you're doing it for higher cost housing. But at the same time, you know, you can't really, people aren't rushing to do really high cost housing in these transitional neighborhoods just yet. So there's a way of kind of thinking about the economics of low-income housing balanced against the lower end of housing that would be gentrification. And so our goal right now is to play the game and create a balance, because we can almost make an economic argument that's as significant for doing the type of low-income housing that we are now, that is fairly close to where the economic benefits of doing, you know, kind of market middle-class housing. But what I also am beginning to see in the future, and I was telling Ed, who I went on a tour with yesterday, and one of the neighbors that's here, is that each and every step I kind of make in this process, I know that it takes a different kind of mindset and a different way of thinking. So, you know, like doing, like the last group of houses that we did was a $4 million project, right? I mean, that's a significant economic thing to the neighborhood. But as things keep moving, you know, these people that are doing the townhomes, I mean, they're doing, you know, $10 million projects. In order for us to make that jump, within the organization or the institutional structure that I have to have $10, $20 million minds, right? You know, so it's like, you know, when you start an organization out, you know, if you're handling $10,000, then you can have a $10,000 mine. You know, but when you get up to 100,000, you got to just grow the competency at that level. And so what we've been doing right now, I have someone that I've been coaching along, but who's a great mind that has retired from corporate America, and so I'm trying to switch them to bring their knowledge base into our effort that can give us a little bit more capacity to kind of balance the approach of development. Yeah. I mean, ultimately, I mean, they have all the capital, so they're going to do it. But at this stage, we can still push back on some level.
Do you mind if people challenge you on the point that this is not really art, or do you get that? Do you hear that sometimes, that people ask you, "Where's the art?" Or "Where's the art?" You know, he's an artist and he's talking about money, 10 millions here, buying homes.
That's always happened in my life. Like when I don't know if you gathered quickly on those first slides that I showed. Those were all from newspaper clippings or whatever. And one of them was that, you know, that was a project I did about police brutality, and the local art writer in Houston, wrote this article, and it said, you know, artists making art or making points, or something like that. You know, I mean, you know. Is it propaganda kind of thing? So I've always had that, even when I was doing more traditional kinds of stuff. And then...
but what's your self-understanding? I mean, do you consider your work art?
Yeah, you know, for me, you know, I'm trained as an artist. I think as an artist. So when I engage in the work that I do, I go through the process that I know and the process that I'm trained as. So for me, it's just a natural extension of my creative practice as an artist. Now, from a formal standpoint and how you articulate it and give some stamp of rationale as an art project, from a formal standpoint, you know, people like Grant Kester and all those guys have to make a decision whether, you know, like they'll you know, writers, people that spend their time thinking about whether it's art. I can't spend my time, and I don't have a desire to spend my time trying to wage the argument, you know, is this art? I mean, you know, it's my practice, and you know, and that's what I do.
And who burns the houses?
Who?
Well, you talked about that these houses burned down.
Yeah, you can't really know for sure, but you know, there's real estate speculators that usually go into these neighborhoods and buy most of this property, and that's why. I mean, if it was an individual that owned most of these houses, most individuals will see a house as a resource, and they would rent it to somebody and try to keep it up at some level to keep it occupied. It's only the speculators that find that it's more is easier for them to have it vacant, you know.
But,
And-
you know, I'm surprised that happens so often and there isn't an investigation or something.
Oh, maybe there is,
Oh,
but, you know,
okay.
it's one of those things it does kind of puzzle, you know, that just fires happen all the time like that.
Well, I had another question. So you've worked on so many of these projects that transform social neighborhoods. I mean, what's the formula? I mean, do you have a formula or a recipe or a list of ingredients that need to be in place to make this successful?
From the beginning point, so, no, I haven't generally, but there's been some things that I've learned
Okay.
over time that I'm very interested in. And I'm also, though, when I answer this, I'm interested in talking about the difference between, you know, academic approach to
Oh, sure.
gathering information and kind of from an artist's approach, at least my approach, which is very, you know, it's interesting that they're different approaches. And I think they both have a different place and value. But to answer your question, though, about, you know, things that have to be in place, you know, I've come to learn that there has to be a strong, for me, I'm much more interested now in places where there are things that are happening, right? And there's someone or some possibility that it would happen kind of almost with or without my involvement. But me kind of bringing in something that shifts and adds a different kind of quality to it, you know, that, because, you know, I've tried it in situations where it was kind of more identifying, you know, the place, the location, and coming up with everything, and then at a certain, you can't stay with it forever, right? And then there's not that way of keeping it going. And so I'm very interested, and that's also kind of what I was experimenting with these individuals, because I see, you know, these are people that I know, and I see these traits in them. Can I add something, a quality to what their experiences are that could elevate it in a way? And they'll carry it forward on their own. So that's my own little experiment in that. And then once I know more about that, then I'll be able to see how that could potentially translate into, you know, some project that's in some other place. You know, how do you find someone or some entity that can move it and keep it alive? But the issue, we have a second to do this?
How much more time do you have?
Okay. No, you know, it was very interesting. You know, the academic approach that you talked about of, you know, gathering information and you know, having these strategies that's laid out, which you know, and I love that kind of stuff, but I don't have the capacity. I'm not an expert in anything, right? I mean, so you know, so I just have to kind of, so what I do is mostly, it's all intuitive and instinctive based. And so for me to gather information, I try to find the ways that I can do it in a way that is most, that allows me to kind of absorb, that it gives me some sense of a feeling about what people are thinking, of what the circumstances are, that I can take on through me, because I don't have to provide it for anyone else. It's only for me and my kind of feeling, and I can take it into dialogue that I have in a broader sense. So for me, most of my best collecting of information is I always try to pick up on what people do in their spare time and engage, and I've become like an avid domino player in my neighborhood, you know, and so I have there are places all over the neighborhood that, you know, people know me, they all think I'm kind of, you know, nerdy or something, that I show up and I want to play dominoes with them, but, you know, and I play just well enough to not get kicked off the table, but you get to hear, for me, you know, I get to hear like things that I could never hear in a community meeting, you know, or any kind of thing where I pose a question, you know, and have it so that they have to answer it. You know, I always feel like when that happens, I get an answer that, you know, they're trying to give an answer that will fit the situation, but I try to find the answers in the conversations, in just the natural conversation. And over time of kind of building a certain level of comfort with people and participating. The information flows in a different way.
In short, that's called hanging out, you know.
Yeah, hanging out.
That's what ethnographers do also, you know. But I found that if you want to really know about people's life stories, you know, about their personal histories, you need to kind of create a special event to ask them, and maybe away from the crowd even, because there's a public life where you say certain things, but then there's also stuff you would say in a more private conversation, right? And so that's where there's a place for interviewing. You know, if you want to hear about people's opinions more systematically, or about their life histories. All the interviews I do are mostly life history interviews. How did you get to this place you're in now? Tell me everything. And then, but there's limits even to this sort of interviewing, because it's very somewhat intimidating. We sit across each other, there's a microphone in the middle, and we're not on the same side. So that's why I came up with this idea of, well, let's walk together through the neighborhood. And I'm interviewing you as we go through the neighborhood. And you can give me your personal, private views of what this means, what happens here, what are my memories of what happened at this street corner. Do I pay attention to the garbage that's on the ground, or the little flowers that grow in between? You know, and so I think it takes a variety of approaches, and hanging out is one way. And sure, you get to know a lot that way, right? But I think there's also space for other methods and other approaches to fill in the gaps that might remain when you only hang out.
Yeah, and there's a different purpose too. Like for mine, it's not for the, you know, it's not really research for, you know, that is presented as research. It's much more, you know, it's a personal kind of value thing that I'm trying to get.
And this, you know, doing research is not, you know, you have to have an exact plan. It has to go through the ethics committees, and you have to stick to what you say, and you have to get approval for. So you have a lot more flexibility by not calling it.
I certainly never stick to what I say.
Not calling it research, you know. So there's definitely advantages to a more this kind of practical method. But you know, I do research, and it has to follow certain patterns. But I do think it still can offer. And in fact, my best friend in grad school was an artist, and we did a lot of work together. You know, we walked through neighborhoods, and I observed, and she observed, and we shared notes, and there wasn't much difference in the methods we use, you know. Right. And so I know that it can create a lot of overlap. And I work with several students in the art department, and we have a lot to say to each other. You know, I think it can be a very fruitful dialogue.
Well, you know, another thing though is that, and this is just another question that I have, and I think I've brought it up to some people here so far, is that, you know, I'm not so certain about, I don't know how we articulate it, and this is a problem to articulate the value that art bring to transformation of communities. It's a real, and I always think about it how most times I think people try to show that it's kind of a cause and effect, you know, that because art did this will happen, and I think you find that that's, you know, you may not find that that's true if you did, you know, an academic test on it or something. But there's the other side, though, that generally you can kind of, but you can look at certain conditions that happen, and it's always kind of in relation to some kind of heightened sense of art and cultural awareness around, you know. And so it's not so much cause and effect, but there's some correlation, and I'm always trying to figure that out, because I try not to inflate the importance of it, you know, and I don't want people to think that, you know, artists are like, you know, kind of the saviors, that, you know, you get artists to come and everything gets better and that kind of stuff. So that kind of bothers me from that. And I don't, you know, have you any, what do you say to that then about how you make that association between art and neighborhood transformation?
Well, I hear you say art is not a means to the end of neighborhood, of social change. It's a more complex relationship. Right? And you know, that's probably similar to what research can do for social change. You know, you cannot, research shouldn't just be a tool to implement social change. There's also like basic research. You just want to find out how it works, and it doesn't always, it's not the cause for social change later. So maybe there's a parallel, you know, and I can see that art is more about the process. It's about having fun and involving people that have been marginalized, but it all depends on how you define social change. You know, what you could say that already is change happening.
Wendy, Raul, do you have any? I thought Margaret brought in some interesting comments about the aspect of collaboration in terms of trust and credibility. And, for example, working in your project with a collective. Have you, for example, can you talk about more about how you involved and connected with the girls in the refugee camp?
Yeah, actually, the work that we've been doing is fraught with problems because we are outside of that community, and we're very aware of that. And so there's the sense we're constantly sort of interrogating our own process, which is why I was interested to talk to Raul about this, about the importance of sustainability and creating a mechanism for the girls then to do their own work after we leave. And so that has become like a really important part of our process. And, again, I'm in response to some of your comments, Maggie, this idea of, can art actually transform a community? And, I have very humble kind of opinion about that. All I can speak to is kind of our experiences, because we've returned to the camp many times. We don't all go at one time, but between us there have been probably 10 visits to the camp at different times. And for us, the signals that something useful is happening is the fact that the girls are becoming, because there are very few sort of community activities for the girls beyond family. And so it's very rare that they sort of come together and take part in any kind of organized activity outside of, I guess, home and school. So, but they've begun to sort of offer their own workshops and classes, and they're teaching each other to edit video and so on and so forth. But our involvement is still kind of, I don't want to say it's necessary. It's not necessary, but we, they have come to kind of expect and hope for an annual visit, at least. And so at the moment we're committed to that in one way or another. But it's too soon to tell. I mean, we were talking yesterday about, and we were talking with Cesar, and he was talking about a project that he's working on in Peru. And Cesar is looking out, at probably a realistic time frame of 10 years, in terms of, that'll be a point in time at which I can kind of assess the work that I'm doing and know how much progress I'm making. So those are some of my immediate responses to some of the things that you guys are talking about.
Well, in my case, I have several things I wanted to say to you guys. From the first things about authenticity. My case is quite different from at least you. For one, we really don't have 4 million thing for budget to do stuff. Yeah. No, but or we haven't gotten to that point. But because we're dealing with things in which you want to build authenticity, you got to build like safety structures that net out these people. And then what I have done in terms of how do I relate to these people, well, first is to build trust, no? And when you build trust, you start building this authenticity with them, no, more than the rest of the people, because we deal with stories and people, right? And we have developed, and I'm glad to share with anybody who's here, but with you guys, the type of methodologies that we have developed in order to do contextual studies. One of them quite looks like one of yours. One is called white noise, and the other one, it's about very simple mapping projects, like the one that you saw over here that in another time or whenever you want I can explain. But the one for the first houses that you saw had to do with something that we call significant routes, cognitive cartographies, and situational mapping. No? And they have to do with those deals. When we do those things, we started to establish first where are we going to build the terrains of this house, because we deal with no terrain. No. At least you had the road thing going on over here. Over there, this terrain, they were completely illegal. No, and it's just the way the city is built. Because when the planners or the architects go, I mean, the people who are teaching architecture, they really have to look into the programs again, at least in the third world practice, because the cities are not being built by architects or planners, but by the necessity of the people. And when they come with their wonderful big plans, the city is already there, right? And we have to readapt to those things. But everything is illegal or between legalities and illegalities. So, for example, in the case of building trust with these people, I completely agree that you have to be on the shoes of those people. And that's one of the biggest flaws of I guess, anthropology and all these things, because you can never do it. I mean, you can get close to it. I mean, and you have to have the common sense to get it, right? And at least approach into something, then you have to get them involved into building. I mean, that's for us. And that for that particular, that is very different from the food project or the garden project, right? But that had been our big whale, no, our Moby Dick. Right now we are making a freaking commitment with the federal government because the stupid municipal government of Tijuana is not really helping us. There is this kind of Illuminati society that wants to have a meeting with me next week that I'm super afraid of going. But the federal government wants me to help them, but they in return want me to start doing this revitalization process of downtown Mexico City, which is humongous. No? And I don't know how successful that's going to be. But and on the other hand, about success and the thing of art as saviors for one, or how to measure success and being humble or not humble, I don't know. I mean, art more than to save other people, for my case, is to save myself. Because the idea of studying quality of life and lifestyles of other people somehow may one day teach me how to have some sort of quality of life for me, no? And what can I tell you? Well, yeah, more or less those were the things that I wanted to tell you. But I'd be glad to show you any type of thing that we do, like that map over there or any other one. Yeah.
Well, the issue of authenticity, I agree completely that it's, that the closer you can get to where people are, the best case scenario, and you can never always, you can never get there completely. But there's another side of it, though, and I try to leave things open-ended because, the world is full of all kind of possibilities, and I like to leave room for, that opportunity of just, wonderful chance when it comes together. So for instance, if I was from the Third Ward, and if I was here, I could have never seen this potential of Project Row Houses. It was really basically because I was from the outside that I could see it, and so sometimes sometimes there are these wonderful opportunities, and it's nothing that I would advise anybody to go out and do. You know, I mean, not to try to like project what would happen in some, because most times you miss, but sometimes you can get it. And the reason that you can get, the only way that you can get it is because you don't have the experiences that people have. Like, most of the people in that neighborhood had never, I mean, outside of my looking at the paintings by this guy, John Biggers, was I able to see shotgun houses as being something that has some value and some quality. Because everybody in the neighborhood just thought they're just terrible, and everybody would want to get rid of them. But, you know, once, you know, I kind of just made this bold little step to say that this is something that has value. And it's amazing now that, you know, it's become an architectural language. In fact, just last Sunday in the Houston Chronicle, they have this article about, you know, Houston's always trying to find its identity, you know, and what's its identity, and said, you know, they were looking at 50 architectural forms that had some reflection of the identity of Houston. And it was very interesting that the number 3 on there was Project Row Houses, the site of the shotgun houses, as beginning to have an impact on even the entire city of the identity. But, you know, so.
Then why are you talking that there is no social change?
No, it's, I just.
You're too humble.
No, it's not humble. It's just that, you know, there's like so much stuff though, you know? I mean, still, you know, they're closing down schools continuously. You know, poverty is still, I mean.
In my case, it has become the other way around. One time I was doing a conversation like this in Mexico City, and the next day they went where I was staying, and a white Suburban arrived and put me inside and took me to the White House of Mexico, to start talking about certain projects, but the help never even came on or anything. They just promised so many things that mind boggled me of this thing, but they only become like process of political exchange for them, and then they never come pull it through. No.
Well, but you know, I also say, you know, when I give this short, brief presentation, I don't talk about the challenges and struggles of getting started. But, you know, I mean, I didn't get any money from the city for any projects until 2003. You know, so from 1994 or 93 all the way, it was like 10 years almost before any money from the city. And it's like you, it was coming from outside of the city, from, you know, my making contacts with art institutions and funding sources outside of the city that was able to support it. And then, you know, there was some local stuff.
Well, it's just a great pride.
Huh? Oh, you're saying it's
Yeah, you
okay.
need to write.
No, I don't, I think that, I think I find there are artists all over that are doing interesting things. And I think it's just really finding out, I think the real issue is, I mean, you have such artists here who are pushing the boundaries of how they can apply their creativity, in very different ways, but it's pushing the boundaries. And I think the more artists are doing that, the more that, it starts to seep in. And I mean, for, like my practice in Houston, because of the way that my practice has taken me, it has kind of put me in that position that you're saying in Houston, that I sit in conversations with people, on all levels, from business leaders to government people, and I don't know how seriously they take me, but, at least I get to sit there and throw stuff out. And then I keep hearing things like I was with this guy, Maurice Cox, who he's the director of the National Endowment for the Arts Design Program, but he was the former mayor he's an architect, and he was the former mayor of Charlottesville, Virginia. And, he said something that was really interesting, and I was glad to hear it, but he said that, he started to realize that he could not govern the city the way that he wanted to unless he had open-minded, creative thinking people somehow involved. And so he went to all of his departments, he said, and he looked at all of them, and he just appointed architects, artists, and all this, across the city, as a way for himself, because he said, he thought it was just too weird that whenever he would bring up things, people just didn't have a clue of what he was talking about, and so having other people on those commissions, at the table with him gave him another opportunity. I think that, I understand what you're saying, and I see what he did as something that, was a great gesture, but I don't know how far that's gone and how far to go.
It just seems to change it seems so real in what you're describing. And of course, I believe in that idea that whatever the potential practice in arts is engaging in, there's some kind of reverberation in the society that eventually makes change. Yours just seems sort of left and then we're not hearing the challenges. It's just sort of frustrating because I want to see that in my city life, my neighborhood, my community here, and I wish there was a way to make what you're making happen all over.
But I think it can, and it does happen here. And one of, maybe Julie, as educators, one of our roles is to try and encourage our students and by our own practice to start to do things in the community. And I think I'm just thinking of like Chelsea Goodwin's Neighborhood Watch project, which I think it was a very small project, and it happened 2 years in a row, but that's the kind of project, and it was a graduate student here who got a group of artists together, and they projected videos onto people's houses, and then she orchestrated like a map of places to walk through the neighborhoods, and it really brought people out of their homes, and it was in a kind of a more upscale neighborhood, the Seminole Heights neighborhood. But I think we're in a perfect situation as members of this institution to sort of inspire some of those activities, and then the work that Alan did with the bookmobile last year, those kinds of things. I see potential for it. But doesn't it start small?
Yeah, that's what I think that's the.
How did it start? Did it start larger or?
No, I think that's the thing, is starting small, because because I think what Raul's saying, because they're basically working with nothing, and making something out of it. So just, And, you know, I mean, you say right now that there's not the resources and stuff, but the continued work over time, you know, it will begin to push for resources, even if it's not from official sources, but informal sources will start to push resources.
Or building other types of economy, like the ones
That's
of the
exactly.
food project.
Yeah. Yeah,
For
absolutely.
example, the food project, guys who will wear shoe shiners to guys who were executive in offices will go and buy the food, right? And every time it will sell out. And then we started to franchise it to all these students who needed the money, who started to do this. And now there are bigger franchises who want to franchise us.
That's
And
great.
what I just found out is that they just did a pirate picudita, one pirate food product of mine that they call the little triangle. No, so it's doing something.
Yeah.
No, and
Yeah, it's just giving it the opportunity to, you know, it's small gestures. I think, you know, whenever I hear the big, giant gestures, unless that big, giant thing has lots of little parts that can go, it won't go.
Because part of it is some of the things we've been talking about, which is like trust building, right?
yeah.
And that begins sometimes with very small gestures, very small projects. I mean, the only way that we can kind of enter that community that we go and work in is through a very small gesture of a creative activity. And we always do that as a way to break the ice and start a conversation between us and the girls, and that's to show them how to bind a book, you know? And it's that small thing, that small gesture, a creative activity, or where you get to sit down at a table together and tear paper and what have you. I mean, I think, you know, I don't think you're ever going to get the kind of support, institutional or otherwise, for projects, you know, just by making a proposal.
Right.
One has to see something happening on the ground first.
For example, in the project of 9 families, before doing the video that you saw, we had to go months into just hanging out with these people and their trust in us. And I mean, I knew we had their trust when they made me a birthday party. I mean, one of these women, I mean, the one that earns more money earns a little bit, almost $50 a week for her and her family, you know? And her job is wonderful. You know what she does? She starts doing drawings of Warner Brothers and Disneyland characters and sells it to school kids. Wow. No, and she's the one who earns more money. And
That's good.
And when they, you know, they buy, you know, their liters of Coke and Frito-Lay bags that, you know, they're spending, I don't know, 2 days worth of what they should be spending, because that's the other thing. What access do these people have? Because a lot of these things are about access. In fact, even water. No, it's cheaper to get a 2-liter Coke bottle that has about 1 kilo of sugary stuff, no, than water itself that is distributed by the same people. No, but yeah.
What Rick said earlier about the row houses and how it has changed perception from them being like a stigmatized place to being a place of pride and being featured in a paper. I would love to see the same thing happening for the trailer parks I'm studying that are very much part of the Florida landscape. You know, there's a very stigmatized existence. People think these are communities that have no value. And so that would be a great case to bring in maybe a larger group of people to create some change.
Because like with Rick and yourself, I mean, it activated dialogue, right? I may have not built the community yet, but they have put me even in architectural journals, right? And now there are these schools doing programs to try to apply certain aspects of what we're doing. No, I would love for them to be giving us money to do what we're doing, but at least it's activating that amount of dialogue.
You know, let me just kind of say something about this, about the changing perception of places. The thing when I was talking about the aspects of good communities that I was getting from this guy, John Biggers, when he talked about architecture, he said it's important to have good and relevant architecture.
Yeah.
You know, and so what happens, what the challenge for me in terms of dealing with the shotgun houses was to pull up the relevance, you know, and make it contextualize the value of the architecture, as opposed to people saying, well, you know, if good architecture is only the 3,000, 4,000 square foot suburban house, then the shotgun house is not good at all, or the trailer home is not good at all. But if you look at the relevance of, you know, the 3,000 square foot suburban house to a person that lives in my neighborhood that lives in a shotgun house, then you can start talking about, you know, not, you know, because that suburban house in my neighborhood is not relevant. It doesn't make sense, and so it's not good if you take it from there. And the same thing with the shotgun house. Well, it's not good if you put it, you know, in this suburb. But if you look at the relevance to it and you start having conversation about that, then it gives an opportunity for people to start thinking about it differently and give it its true value.
That's good.
Yeah, just in terms of Julie's question, how can we make it happen? Automobile project, I just wanted to speak for the possible value of failure.
Yeah.
Mm.
Panels like this, one never really,
Yeah.
one hears about the successful projects, but, you know, as an architect, how many drawings, how many proposals do we see the finished work of architecture, all of which may be said to have failed as a result of this sort of thing. But you learn, you make connections, and what remains constant is the initiative.
I want to say something about that. I completely agree with you. There is an important aspect about it. In fact, when, like, I don't know if I mentioned, but I proposed to do a bridge in the city of Liverpool that was obvious that they should do it. No, it was just obvious. No, I mean, I don't want to get into the details. And that's the project that went into the Lord's house. And then, so the people who hired me to do a project over there tell me, well, at least with all the research that you did, please do something else. And it turned out to be a complete nightmare with these people. So I ended up doing like a parasite truck that looked like a rubbish truck, as they say, that people carry it, that transform, no? And then I started asking friends of mine that I admire, from writers to curators to professors and fellow peers, to give me projects that somehow were rejected at some point or failed. No, and to document it, or if they were little objects or whatever, and then we package it and we put 3 lines of what the project was about and how to reach these people. And we actually, for at least we sold them, no? And on the other hand, when you were there, you were part of the Liverpool Biennial, so it became another venue. But I completely agree with you. There is something to be taken from that. There was one project that was very nice. It was a book about all the rejected projects from the Venice Biennial. No? Well, and on the other hand, of what you were saying, there is another aspect about looking at the broader, at least in my case, because you deal with building basic infrastructure, that you have to deal from the idea of nourishment as home, nourishment as your life. I mean, how could you, act accordingly to your profession or whatever if you're not getting enough nourishment, no? Or if you're in a place that have other type of possibilities and the temperatures start rising, and the thing that I've been seeing, if the temperature rises above 36 degrees Celsius, I mean, you're not yourself. You have problems concentrating. You're moody. You start failing until you collapse, right? So, and it's funny, in Tijuana, for example, and in a lot of cities in the north of Mexico, if they give you 300 square meters to construct, they construct it all. No, and that there is no sense of the neighborly thing to do, right? Or to share some space, or
Open
to do
space.
green areas or something. That's why the project of the gardens was relevant, because it's not only about doing nice garden. It would be very nice if they are nice garden, But it's also about this strategy to start lowering temperature and making people, interact in a different manner.
Is that what you call the project 1 degree
Celsius, yeah, that's what there is a 30-year commitment to it, because it's in 30 years that you will see some of those gardens have the correct size. So there is a real, how you say, evidence of it in the city. It will have an immediate impact, but it's very immediate surroundings,
Now I know.
It might also be that we as citizens have to demand more of our institutions. Like, for instance, I'm on the Public Art Committee for the City of Tampa, and I would like to see that committee embrace different kinds of projects in our community to fund things other than sculpture, other than objects, yeah. So that falls on the community too, then, to make that, to express that to those bodies, because without that sentiment, and we have people from city government on that committee also.
A couple of questions back there.
Go ahead.
Okay, this will show a little bit my age and my educational background, but in fact the word Torolab is a reconstruction of the word laboratory in Spanish. No, so there's always a dark humor thing that we practice in the work. No, some people have even considered our work dangerous, especially the surveillance maps that we do and stuff like that. And it's a problem to cross the border after that. But the bunnies themselves, it became like a joke of the lab rabbit, right? And that it mutated into this executive that shows the system in manuals, right? Because this is the first time I show my drawings. At some point, persons who are close have seen the drawings, but I have never shown. People see the systems, And in the process of showing and interacting with the people who can make the systems happen, I do manuals. Like, for example, the drawing in which you have, the stretching exercises before and after gardening with the bunny. So it became that. And also on a scale model to interact with the proposals when you're drawing them. Yeah. Oh man, okay. I don't know if I will be able to answer correctly this, but the involvement, I mean, you mean with the community itself and how to get them involved into the project? Is that what I? Of course. In my case, and I'm sure, I mean, I always build a group around first there is this idea of analysis and hypothesis, and through that the group is built, right? And there is a slight difference between somebody that you're paying them to do something for you, to someone who commits and goes over the top to be on the project because they believe in it. So it is, again, a question of trust and belief, no, into these things. But you have to have that relationship established well, through human contact and being aware and being and just believing on the project that you're doing. And sometimes, when the projects make sense and are working in this fluid territory that I see we practice, in which it goes beyond the realm of the political concerns or the anthropological concerns or any other concern that probably has been touched but it's there and it's evident and it makes sense. It's very easy to connect, right? Now, in the case of my person in particular, I always use persons who help me get the trust of people because sometimes I appear suspicious.
That's a very good point. Because sometimes it is that you have to get other people, and I'm not talking about you just looking suspicious, but no, that's a very good point. Sometimes, it just takes, because, for me, there are multiple layers of people, right? I mean, from people who are going to be benefiting from whatever the program is, from a neighborhood or whatever. And then there are kind of my peers. And then there are people that I'm trying to get resources from them that comes from completely different worlds. And, I don't necessarily, fit what, the kind of person they're accustomed to looking across the table to. So it's always good to be able to have someone else to make those introductions.
And then it goes around.
Yeah.
Right? For example, when we were doing 9 Families with Carmen, which is the first girl that everything was surrounded by, first of all, she trusted me, and she believed in, and that was good, because at some point we found a dead body, and in the neighborhood, and it was good that. Not that we found the dead body, of course, but that Carmen was there because the 2 gangs who were afraid that she would go to the police, and we got a visit from them, and she managed to talk them out of it that we were not going to do nothing. And so she became our bodyguard because now these 2 gangs protected us there, thank goodness, and so it goes both ways, first. And then the other people, because you see, when we told Carmen to show us 9 families that she wanted to share her life with, there were some families that didn't know each other. They knew Carmen. So then we have to build the bridges of trust between those. And I think that was the most amazing part of the process of the project, more even than the amazing result of the design that they did themselves, not by architects, but by themselves. And it's amazing. Well, that's what I think.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to respond to your question in reference to our project, and that is that we're not doing anything that special that they're not doing in Dehesha already. There's a popular committee there that is very well structured, that has built the community center there. This community center is called Al-Faniq, which means the Phoenix, and it's called the Phoenix because it's been knocked down 3 times by the Israelis, and they've rebuilt it each time. And within the community, they take care of people whose husbands are taken away to prison. The women work together doing embroidery projects, which they then turn around and try and sell to raise money for families. And each time we go, we load up on presents. And but so they're actually doing the same kind of work there on their own already. It's not like, we're nothing special whatsoever. But having said that, they're always really glad to see us because they're so isolated that there's very few connections with people outside of the West Bank and actually outside of the refugee camp, because even within the West Bank, there's a lot of sort of stigmatism for the camps themselves. You know, people from Bethlehem won't go to Tahitian. It's like going from New Tampa to here. You know, it's that close. And so, we're really not doing anything that special. They don't see our kinds of activities as strange or anything. And that was a big surprise to us.
And I'd also say that, you know, suspicion is not necessarily a bad thing, because I always think you should be suspicious of people that are not suspicious. When you're coming, you know, I mean, why shouldn't people be suspicious, you know, when they don't know who you are and you're coming into their community? So it's
true,
yeah.
You know, but if you encounter a lot of resistance to what you're planning in the long run, maybe you have to reopen the dialogue.
right.
Maybe you're not. Maybe the changes you want are not the changes that the people want, and you can't push change through against the will of the people who live in this community. I mean, that's not a good point.
Yeah, you were not close enough to the shoes they
Yes.
wear.
So a little bit of resistance or, you know, awareness in
good.
the beginning is one thing, but if you encounter continued resistance, then that's not a good sign for that you're doing the right kind of work, I would say.
I think we're going to close this morning's session, which has been, from my perspective, very invigorating and inspiring. And please take a lunch break and return this afternoon to this very room at 2 o'clock. And our presenters will be Lori Palmer, Associate Professor and Chair of Sculpture at the School of Art of the Art Institute of Chicago. And the respondent will be Shannon Bassett, Assistant Professor of Architecture and Urbanism at USF School of Architecture, and Elizabeth Strom, Director of Urban and Regional Planning and Associate Professor of Department of Geography. And then later in the afternoon, our presenter will be Dr. Grant Keister, Chair and Associate Professor of Art and Art History in the Visual Arts Department at the University of California, San Diego. And the respondent will be Dr. Alan Moore, who is an independent art critic, writer, activist, and taught as a visiting professor last semester here at USF, and worked on, I guess, a project he now characterizes as a failure, but was his bookmobile. So, further, then, I invite you tonight, you see, this is a marathon day. We're continuing on to come to celebration of the exhibition that Isabel has organized at the Contemporary Art Museum at 7 o'clock tonight. So I welcome you all this morning, and I look forward to seeing you this afternoon and this evening, and thank you all for coming.